It's a very familiar sound, that, isn't it? Oh, how relaxed do you feel? Just that lapping of water on the seashore. I've come back, I say back, we haven't been here before as a photo walk, but me personally, feels like a bit of a pilgrimage to start the new season of shows, really. I've come back to a place called Studland Bay on the south coast of England. Beautiful Dorset. If I were in charge of television schedules, I'd be saying something like, here's the new look show for late summer, autumn 21, aware, of course, this is a podcast and the season's changed by hemispheres. But it is new. We've a packed mailbag to look through as always, pictures to show you on the show page and pictures to make together. And now new, we have a guest in well, I'm not so sure whether I'm going to call it the second part or the second chapter. I quite like the idea of this being in chapters, in which case there'd be 3. But today we have a guest in the second part or second chapter.
Today on the Photo Walk.
There's no reason not to carry a camera in a little bum bag or chest bag or just on a strap off your shoulder. You could walk down the street, to get a pint of milk or something, and something horrible happens. Or something great happens, but newsworthy. But it's not just that. It just might be that the light's amazing, or you see a phenomenal rainbow, or there's a reflection of something, and it's like, oh wow, that's a great picture. And you shoot it.
That's photojournalist Edmond Terakopian, who joins us later in the new look Photo Walk show. One of the hardest working photojournalists I know. Decades of experience behind the lens. An international, very much travelled photographer who describes English as his third language, though you'd never know it. And a mentor with much to say, as he always does, and expect us to touch on the subject of pictures coming out of Afghanistan, in the sense of photographers who ply their trade as photojournalists. And we start by doing what we've done now for at least a year, by taking a photo walk together, the only photography podcast of its kind. Just you, just me, our cameras, me with a microphone, of course, to read from the mailbag, the digital letters that you've sent in and the pictures that you've shared, which will be on the show page today, with plenty of other links. Today, some advice to stop you stressing about your picture making from a photographer in Quincy via a book by David Hearn and the late great Bill J. Long exposure sweet spots. News about the new 365 feature, which we're starting in September. And frankly, we don't care. Why not? Photo Walk step counts going wild in Hungary, studying the people of Denmark in Aarhus, the great mask debate. Do you wear one or not when you're working as a photographer? And would a respected world photographer really use an iPhone to make a book? And one photographer who stopped posting just what he thought clients wanted to see on his Insta feed and posted, well, you'll find out later. We also have inspirational thoughts from former guests Jason P. Howe, I just can't get enough, Tim Johnston, and of course there's our guest, Armenian-born photojournalist Edmond Terakopian. Here's a question. Is there a piece of camera kit in a cupboard, in one of those camera bags that you've not looked in for a while, or tucked in a drawer, a lens, a flash, a camera that you just haven't used lately? For some reason, you're holding on to this thing, but you don't know why, or you'd forgotten you even had it. Well, now is the time to turn that old kit into cash. If you're in the US, Europe, or the UK, and you can spare just a few minutes, because that's all it takes, go to mpb.com and sell it using the simple process on the front page. You'll end up with cash that you can either pocket or, of course, trade on the site for kits you'd much rather have instead. Right, I'm looking forward to hearing from Edmond in the second part of the show, but first we have a mailbag to look through. Your pictures to talk about and some photographs to make in the Photo Walk. Boots on, some sunscreen today, well, where I am, some tourist repellent spray also needed, lens caps off, let's walk. One of the problems with doing a walk next to the sea in a very popular tourist location is you're bound to be surrounded by people. And you know me with these photo walks. This is my chance of solitude, a bit of peace and quiet, away from the marauding crowds. And I should have known better. Summertime, not a bad day, reasonably sunny, and I'm surrounded by tourists. I managed to find a place. I'm just on my way towards Old Harry's Rocks, It's a walk that many people take. I was thinking I'd have a chance to record a few of the mails that you sent in, but I was just surrounded by people. Then I found just off the beaten track that goes out towards one of the cliff edges, sort of a very peaceful, quiet place, and I thought, this is perfect. I've got beautiful views and I can make a couple of images and share them with you. And then I was joined by a family flip-flop, or thong as you would call them in Australia. So I've come off the beaten track a bit more. I'm on a path that's running parallel with the cliff walk, but at least it's just me on my Todd and you. That's what the photo walk's all about, isn't it? Us, our cameras, me with the mail bag. And let's kick off with a mail from Ryan Midwater, quite a few thousand miles away from where I stand at the moment anyway, in Quincy, Massachusetts. And first-time writer. Well, it's good to hear from you, Ryan. Hello, Neil. I'm not sure if you've mentioned this book before, but when I took up photography again in 2015, after considerable time out, a friend of mine gifted me a book called On Being a Photographer by David Hearn and Bill J. I know it well. A conversation between two worldly photographers, the latter sadly no longer alive, but 30 years of friendship made for the most incredible book about photography. It's a conversation, really, between the two of them, more than a straight textbook. But I've spent hours studying and re-studying text from the book, because that's what it is. A book with no pictures. And it's probably responsible for making photography my home once again. I first took up photography in the 1980s. At the time I lost my older brother to a boating accident. I'd spend days away at a time with my camera, making pictures of landscapes mainly. I even had a show and sold pictures at a gallery locally to me. It was literally life liberating at one of my lowest points growing up, and I know that you've had guests on before who've shared similar experiences. But then, just as life will have you do, the camera was swapped for a daily commute that meant I only returned to photography 6 years ago, when moving out to Quincy following the passing of my wife. But instead of it becoming the hobby I thought it would become, and perhaps a chance once again to even show my work, it was as if my creative side had been stripped entirely by years in a city. It created an unwelcome level of anxiety. So my good friend sent me the book by David and Bill and circled a passage on page 48, where Bill J. had just started his friendship with David Hearn on a strange footing, being told that his pictures were pedestrian and somewhat boring. Talks about the power of new starts and stopping trying too hard. Too hard to take pictures and too hard perhaps to be as good as other photographers around you. And it was a feeling I felt well. In the book on page 48, Bill says, "It was such a relief I started shooting anew with a simple concentration on the subjects that most interested me, with no thought of success, prestige or recognition, but with a joyous liberation which continues to this day." The book has many moments like this, but this one passage says so much about the pressure we heap upon ourselves as photographers, and I hope it'll impress upon others to track down this book. I promise it's worth your time. Keep up the good work, and for my fellow photographers, allow yourself some time to be creative. Good advice, Ryan. Very good advice. And that I did. I went. My copy of the book is well. Well, it's well annotated. Annotated? It's been scribbled in by whoever owned the book before me. And I've got a feeling that was a friend of mine in this country, a photographer that I've interviewed before called Paul Rogers, who was a photographer with the Times, and now he shoots weddings. And I'm pretty sure that he gifted me that book. And it felt even more special because it had all his notes and scribblings in there. I like stuff like that. And I know for some people that's a terrible thing, isn't it? Scribbling in books? No, Neil. But no, I like it. I like to read the thoughts and feelings of those that have trod before me with a volume. So I'm pretty sure it was Paul. Yeah, I think it was. But so I found the copy. It did take me a while, but I've underlined that part as well. Sometimes I know I'm particularly hard on myself, and it's probably because we live in this land of instant gratification. So actually that text, that piece there, that's a particularly potent piece of text for me. I'm stumbling a bit because the sunshine's just come out and it's just illuminating this path in just one place. So the whole scene is vignetted, if you like, by the trees around it. You know I'm a sucker for that shot. So before the sun goes in, because it's in and out at the moment, I'm going to try and get that shot for you. What are we at? 640 ISO, 5.6, shutter speed 100th. There we go. But while I think about it, Ryan, a friend of mine recently sent me an email about projects being placed in the waiting room. And I'm mentioning this because of anxiety. Because you mentioned anxiety in your piece, and I have a certain amount of anxiety always with projects that I plan and want to start and never quite get around to doing. I'm the eternal sort of project starter, and that drives a certain amount of creative anxiety, I think, with me. And so she'd sent me a piece about projects being placed in the so-called waiting room, which I really liked. To let them sit there for a few moments with the magazines and the periodicals you've not looked through for quite some time, a bit like the David Hearn book that we're mentioning there with Bill J. To let them sit there for a few moments and just wait a bit longer before you pick them up and read them. So placing projects in the waiting room, I think that's a really good really good expression. They're in the waiting room. Don't worry, they'll be out soon. Let me play a clip, the first one this week, from a former guest, Tim Johnston, who I suppose is relatively new to photography if you look at years behind the lens. He came to the sort of the flip side of feeling anxious about creativity. He found that creativity was actually the liberating factor to remove his deep life anxieties. So from episode 29, when you mentioned the word anxiety, I thought, I'm going to dip back and see what Tim Johnston said about his own anxieties and what photography means to him.
I got my first sort of proper, in quote marks, camera in June 2018. And basically, just getting into photography, I found that when I took photos, and especially when I had the viewfinder to my eye and was really doing a lot of street photography, that the rest of the world sort of became quiet and I could really just focus on the moment. And part of the problem with my anxiety, at least, is this inability to control my mind and to just really focus on the present moment, because your mind is always wandering off and sort of imagining worst case scenarios. Whereas with photography, that really forced me to be able to just focus on that moment and really just be deliberate in what I was doing. And that was really liberating. And especially when you can then look back and not just experience that moment, but have, a photo that you're proud of at the end of it, is really a rewarding process. And it just became kind of an addiction from that point.
Tim Johnston from episode 18. Of course, I'll put up the links to the guests that provide some inspiration, as ever, on the Photography Daily Show page today. Some mails from you in a moment, but I want to say a name first of all. Martin Parr. Yes. Until October 3rd, 21, I'm proud to partner on this show, a photographic outdoor exhibition in the south of England called Photo Swindon. Right now, Martin Parr is the photographer who's exhibiting in the open-air parks. And if you'd like more information about it, you can go to @Photoswindon, which is handy because it's the same if you go onto Twitter, Facebook or Instagram. Let's give a mention to those of you sending in your amazing works, which you'll find on the show page as well, of course. Michael Dries, we'll start with you. Hello, Neil. Last week I was off on a fishing trip with my brothers to the Adirondack region of New York State, which features some pristine freshwater lakes. Near the end of the week, I took a break from the fishing to relax a bit and explore the area on foot. During mid-morning, as I drank my cup of coffee, I noticed a storm front blowing over the lake. On went the 14mm with a 10-stop ND filter on my X-T3 camera and an attempt at some long exposure photography. After a bit of experimentation, I discovered that 10 to 12 seconds seems to be the sweet spot. Now, I've heard people talk about the sweet spot of long exposure, and obviously it's all to do with, the exposure triangle, isn't it? What film speed you're at, or what aperture you're, and so on and so forth. But 10 seconds seems to be a sweet spot that people talk about. I've attached my favourite image from this outing for your 365 feature. And on that note, yes, I'm featuring that picture today, but if you're thinking, what's the 365 feature all about? It's, can we have a show of hands, please? I'd like to start this in September. That'll give me enough chance to get enough of them to have a good running start. Who wants to start that in September? All say aye. Okay. Anybody says earlier or later? No. Okay. September it is. Thank you very much for the vote. But just so you know what it is, 365, you know me with this thing about the title, the branding, Photography Daily, and I struggled a bit with it when I've been going through the various styles of show as we've made our way through the year and eventually ended up with this new Friday edition of the interview and the photo walk all together in one happy family place. But I still struggle with the branding being Photography Daily. But it occurred to me that actually we do photography every day. It's something we think about daily. So having a feature which will be on the top menu of the website that just says Community 365, then our community can take part in a 365. If you've always thought, I'd like to do a 365, but don't think I could be doing this every single day, then this is your opportunity to take part in a 365. You can send in, I think I initially said about 3 images, but really, look, if you want to send more, there's 365 days to fill. There's no reason why you couldn't pop up more than a few times a month at least. So send them in to studio@photographydaily.show. Now, landscape pictures work best for this. That's the only stipulation because of the way that Squarespace and this particular design works. So, landscape-orientated pictures, please, and send them to studio@photographydaily.show, and each day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, we will have our own Community 365. It does not mean you have to take the pictures on the day. No. You can be making these pictures, or you could be sharing these pictures from, say, a year, 2, 3 years ago. Just your favourite pictures that say something about you. Pictures that people will look at on the website and have some sort of emotional reaction to, or something that you're just really proud of. Send them to studio@photographydaily.show, and we're going to have our own Community 365. Does that make sense? Yes. Michael Dries, your picture that you sent today, I'm putting on the show page, but I'm equally going to put this one on the new 365. And I love the angry clouds engulfing the top half of this frame. And a cotton wool lake, well, you know me. For the cotton wool effect, I'm a bit of a sucker for that one. So thank you, Michael. Do you remember I'd asked if you could send me your step counts from these walks that we do, which was sort of successful and unsuccessful in equal measure. That you've got to try stuff, haven't you? And I'll keep mentioning the step counts as you send them in. Super pictures from Daniel Neil-Kiss in Hungary. Loving the vintage, dare I say, Eastern Bloc influence car in your first shot with its travel stickers. Hello, Neil. 11,844 steps during 84 minutes of photo walk. Greetings from Hungary. Huge fan of the show. Pictures are straight out of camera from Daniel. Oh, I love the pictures. I am there with you on your photo walk, and you'll see these on the show page today. That's what's so lovely about having the photo walk show the pictures that you're making as well. That's what this is about. It's you and me with our cameras, me with a microphone on top of that, and of course my digital mailbag on a clipboard, if that's not too much of a contradiction in terms. And we haven't featured any Dennis Skyam pictures for a while, have we? So let me give you 9 more reasons today to visit the show page, and I shall try to do some justice to the pictures by describing them for a podcast. Dennis had a walk around in Aarhus. Is it Aarhus? Aarhus. In Aarhus, in the middle of the street. Yes, I'm going into a madness record. Aarhus. Don't sing it, Neil. No, Aarhus is in Denmark. But Aarhus, that would be sort of a northern Our House, wouldn't it? Our House madness in the middle of the street. Aarhus in the... Never mind. I've picked out 3 of the 9 in particular, Dennis. The marvellous intent... Well, you will see all 9 on the website page, but I've picked out 3 to describe. The marvellous intentional camera movement picture, which I know is flavour of the moment. And I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to ask about intentional camera movement with our guest today, Edmond Terakopian. And I think it fair to say that Edmond's interview, which covers a great amount of ground, everything from we talk about what's going on in Afghanistan with its relation to getting pictures out at these important times as a photojournalist. We talk about, what else do we talk about? We talk about his fascination with fountain pens. Neil, what? I know. Edmond is a true photojournalist. But he found something to do with his lockdown. I won't spoil it. What else do we talk about? We talk about Instagram. We talk about the pandemic still and photographing through it, because, of course, in various different countries, everybody's at various different stages. And then the picture that you have here on this show page. This makes visiting the show page worth it just for this one image alone. It's a cheeky evolution picture. There are what look like, I think it's outside a museum. It looks like two sort of descendant bronze statues, apes, I suppose, ape-like descendants. But then there's a third character in this picture that you've made, Dennis, which I adore. I mean, it's about observation, isn't it? And you have observed this brilliantly. In the top of the picture, there's a girl sitting there on her iPhone or smartphone. Other phone flavors are available, looking down, just glued into this screen. And there's almost this suggestion of this is the evolution of humanity, that we go from this to being glued to a phone. So wonderful observation. Extraordinary. In fact, I'll go as far to say extraordinary observation. Then, of course, you're also the master of simplicity and taking as much out of the frame as you can, Dennis. That image of the solitary woman in a striped dress who looks like at any moment she's going to be completely swallowed by this sort of in-sweeping shadow. Gorgeous. For what you don't see as much as what you do. Look, there are 6 other pictures. Go seek those out on today's show page, which will be linked to via the app that you're listening to this podcast on now. Today then, yes, the first of our new format. If you're wondering what the devil is going on, it's a photo walk and a guest. WTF, as the youth would say. Well, check back to episode 254 for the full explanation. I tell you what, I hope you can hear me, because the wind has really got... Well, you are standing on a cliff edge, Neil. Just to prove it, hold on. Let me grab... so many people. I have to say, I am very self-conscious that I'm talking into my microphone. Here we go. In fact, let's turn towards the sort of the Bournemouth direction. Get another one for you. I'll pop those on the show page today. Oh, I didn't do my EXIF data. Neil, you forgot the all-important ISOs. Oh, I know, but I'm just being a bit self-aware right now. I'm with my microphone, talking into it. But so it's the brand. We've amalgamated the Wednesday chat show and Friday photo walk to make something that I think is unparalleled in photography podcast land. And that's important, because why do something that everybody else is doing already? So generally the 2 shows are as one. And today I can't wait to bring you a guest who's appeared on the show before, but I think is a strong start for his knowledge about shooting as a photojournalist. But as much as anything, his knowledge about photographing just as a passion. I mean, I do say at one stage during our chat about the fact that I think he would bleed fixer or developer if you cut him open, and I mean that. He's just, I mean, passion's such an overused word, but in his case it makes total sense. But let's stop for a few words of inspiration from Edmond Terakopian, and this is the kind of thing that's coming up later.
As photojournalists, we tend to never switch off. You're always looking, you're always wondering, you're always thinking. Everything massive from a huge world event happens to something small locally just down the street as you're walking to get some milk or something. You know, these things are always making you think and making you think about the echoes and the layers and the levels and what effect this is going to have on something else and how the world balances, or, you know, everything literally from a huge, big international thing to a smallest kind of local kind of issue. So whilst I absolutely love what I do and I wouldn't change it for anything at all, it is kind of hard work, but not in a kind of standing in a factory working kind of work, but you're mentally, you never really unwind, you don't really relax, because you're always thinking, you're always looking, you're always exploring and so on.
Edmond Terakopian, who's our special guest on the show today. Welcome to the Photowalk. Yes, just you and I together. Us with our cameras, me with my microphone, taking the time to go through the mailbag from the show, hear what you've been up to with your photography, and of course play some inspiration from former guests in as well. And we're always looking out for interesting stories about your photography, so do keep sending it in. Send to studio@photographydaily.show, studio@photographydaily.show, or you can send, of course, if you're a patron member, through the messenger there, or of course through the Facebook group as well. Right, here's one from Catherine Cunningham on the subject of photographing in these new times, something I think not all clients take seriously. I posted something in our Facebook group the other day about a particular client that had requested me not to wear a mask for fear of, and I quote, the whole thing becoming a freak show. Now, I entirely get people's concern about masks at events like weddings. Yes, I do get that. But of course, in this day and age, it should really be our choice. And, well, last I noted, the pandemic wasn't quite over. You've got Australia now shutting down rapidly in places. Parts of Asia really are in trouble with it at the moment. And at various stages across Europe and America. So, when I got the request, don't wear a mask, for fear that it could also invite other people to wear theirs. For me, that was an awkward moment, and I had an email from Catherine Cunningham. Hi Neil, imagine my consternation when 30 minutes into a photo shoot today at an outdoor venue, one of the family members states that they all just came out of quarantine because Dad had a horrible case of COVID, so bad that he passed out in the bathroom, and they're pretty sure he had some small seizures. But not to worry, they took turns sleeping by him and poking to see if he was alive and twitched. And this was 30 minutes after we started, and I've been close in, posing and grouping. And going forward, I think I'll be asking, has anyone in the party been exposed to COVID or been diagnosed with COVID in the past 21 days? Which I know sounds very medical, doesn't it? Exactly the sort of questions you get when you go in to have your vaccination. But I see your point. It must have, at that moment, you must have been thinking, oh, that's interesting. And the real kicker is that I'm immune compromised and wear a button on my mask that states that, and they all knew my status before we even booked. I'm going to file this, says Catherine, under live and learn the hard way, close quotes. So I did a post in the Facebook group, which is fast becoming the place to discuss issues in an adult fashion, where you don't receive the frank abuse where other groups seem to descend a ladder of impatience with each other. I posted about my experience that I explained just a moment ago. And the group had the best part of 60 replies last look. What to do about wearing a mask as a photographer on a commission, or as a photographer out on a job, if you will. I can't read every reply. We'll be here for the entire show, but I can feature a few. And the rest, well, I'll leave a link on the show page so you can join the group and read for yourself. James Souls, it's a personal choice, so if you or others choose to wear one, it's absolutely fine and should be respected by the couple and others at a wedding. Asking you not to wear one feels wrong to me. We're still in a pandemic. It seems very selfish of them, but that's just my opinion. I wear one at weddings currently. Now, I know we're talking about weddings, but this can be any event, can't it? Even editorial. If you're in a tight space within a building, it counts as well. Jason de Plater, here it's law, but if it's a personal choice and there's still positive cases, I'd absolutely wear a mask for some peace of mind. I find the KF94 comfortable to wear when working, and they offer much better protection than the disposable masks. You can get them in black or white. Black may stand out less when your face is behind the camera. If you're thinking about blending in, I have to say I've not thought about it that way. What's a KF94? I think every country has a different descriptor for the power, the protective force of the mask, don't they? But a black one behind a camera. Which works well if you keep the camera there all the time. Elias Camaratos, can they guarantee that all guests are double vaccinated? With the right documented proof, I just came back from a trip to Italy where to enter a closed public venue, you have to show your electronic proof of vaccination. Oh, don't start us on that one. You'll have all sorts of debates. And a march, probably. It is, of course, up to you if you feel you need to wear one or not, and it's definitely not something somebody can ask. Even more so, demand of you. Yes, agree. From today's guest, Edmond Terakopian, who is in the group, astonishing. If this were me and the client insisted, I'd drop them immediately. The real freak show happens in ICU, not their guests and photographer being responsible and following 100% proven scientific responsible advice. Nothing to do with a gut feeling or feeling comfortable. It's about being responsible and societally minded. Weddings aren't my main genre, but I did do a wedding last year and wore a mask throughout, from bridal prep all the way through to the party. I've worn a mask on every assignment I've had, from editorial to corporate, and never heard such a selfish and shocking comment. Christina Kipfer, masking is your decision, Neil, and someone else shouldn't force you into compromise your health and some balance. Anna McCarthy, I think selfish is maybe a strong word here for a couple about to have their wedding day. They have asked the question. Masks are not mandatory, and it's understandable how they feel. They haven't issued a dictator ultimatum. I wouldn't run for the hills. No, I'd empathise and just explain how you need to protect yourself as best you can in order to keep yourself in work at this time. So, well, there we go. There's the start of the debate. I'll let you join in. Thank you to those that already have. I have read every single comment. Right, time to break for a little inspiration, I think, from the library. Episode 246. Jason P. Howe, swapping firefights for fireflies.
Well, I've only recently returned to shooting assignments.
Yeah.
So I am working mainly, I'm choosing stories that I can get to within this region. So I recently shot an assignment about the home raising and slaughter of pigs.
Right.
I've done another one on Serrano ham in the local, which is a local speciality. Yeah. I am working on this long-term project about life in the countryside, which, as I say, I hope will, with another 1 or 2 years worth of work, have a good enough body of work to publish as a book and as an exhibition, which I hope can travel widely in Spain, because there's such a gap between rural life and urban life. Most children don't really seem to know where milk and eggs and meat and so on originates from. They think it comes from the supermarket, you know. So it'd be great to show this process. And I'm really loving finding things like the last shepherd who still knows how to shear using scissors, and the last man who knows how to plough using a mule. And I believe, these are small little fragments of history which are definitely worth photographing and preserving. But the main way, and it's funny, I was thinking about this earlier, previously for the interview, that my dream when I worked in the camera shop was, could I earn a living from being a photographer? And back then, which must be 30 or something years ago, I used to earn £175 a week. Yeah. And so my dream was, would I be able to make a living? And so the living was the equivalent to that. Now the problem is, as life goes on, we get used to having more and more money and more expensive toys, and we want to have a house and a mortgage and this car and all this kind of thing. But choosing a simple way of life that you can afford means you can be picky and choosy about what work you do. And so I generally now pitch the stories to the clients, and I'm pitching stories that I want to photograph. And I think that really seems to work. And then you're not going to end up having to do sort of soul-destroying press conferences or something like that, the kind of thing that just saps the will to live and drains all your creativity.
Jason P. Howe. And of course, I'll give the link to his episode in the famous show notes, as we call them today, which you'll find via a link on your app, of course, taking you to the show page. This is a beautiful part of Studland Peninsula. Studland and this coast that goes all the way along the south coast from west to east, as I look towards Bournemouth, has all this wonderful shrubland. Beautiful colours. Look at this. Let me get a picture. Just sort of a windswept tree at the end of this path as it sits next to the peninsula. And these wonderful, wonderful purples. Here we go. What are we on? We've got 160 ISO, f5, shutter speed 1250. Lovely. Pop that on the show page. Here's another link to go visit from the show page to our patron of the day today, who is Asker Mar Olofsson. I hope I have got that right. There should actually be some sort of voiced jingle, shouldn't there? I hope I've got that right. Where are we? Do we go left or right here? Marvellous. I want to find sandbanks, actually, which is just this gorgeous long stretch of sand, funnily enough, which I will find soon enough. I'm a new patron, says Askir. Only been one for a few weeks, but I've listened for much, much longer. I'd love if somebody would take a look at my site or Insta and give some feedback. I'm a new photographer, been taking this seriously for about 7 months, so there'll be many mistakes, but all critique is welcome. I will give you a link to his work, and it doesn't, I'm not just saying this, I'm not patronising you at all, but honestly, it does not look like you've only been photographing for, seriously, for, what did you say, 7 months? There's a mature eye and a maturity to your work, which is really impressive. Okay, where am I? I've come to the back end of some sort of hut. What's this? Studland Heath Base. Oh, it doesn't allow me to go any further. I can't get around you. What's that children's book? Can't get over you, can't get around you. Have to go under you, or whatever that expression is. Oh, it's a bit windy up here as well. Can you hear me? Yeah, 7 months. Your work is so mature. It really is. I'll give you some feedback since you've asked for some. Size with capital letters, SIZE, size. I adore images that show me the sheer size of the world, and in your landscapes they do exactly that. For example, the pictures that have the tiny helicopters in them, I'm sure this is your plan, but that shows, well, there's context and size again, I'm going to keep saying size, and details like your boot that you just seem to leave in the frame down to the left hand. That's what makes your pictures, your ability to place us in the world. I think that's what good landscape photography does, because you can look at, I mean, I've been making pictures here, but unless you've got something where you can see, I mean, this is this sort of a great expanse of wilds here and heathland. This must be a bird watcher's paradise, a birder's paradise. But if I were to take a picture now, it would just look like a big lake. But if I had something that could give me some sort of idea of the vast nature of this lake before me, that would make the picture 100 times more interesting, and that's what you seem to be able to do. So thank you for that. And for the price of one high street coffee per month, patrons are really important to helping this show stay here. To thank them, the patrons this is, get to hear the extra more editions, which are a mix of personal photographic diary essays, our book club and all sorts of other stuff. Tomorrow, Saturday, part 1 of my conversation with the cinematographer Paul Cameron. Not heard before. I've had it for a couple of months now. It's just for Patreon ears, this one. He is best known for his work with, work on the film Collateral and the HBO series Westworld. So, that'll be on the Patreon, over on the More Show tomorrow on the Patreon channel, which, of course, you'll find links to. Before we hear this week's guest, Elliot Thomas, thank you for your message. Yesterday, my phone contract was up, so I upgraded to the iPhone 12. I decided before I went shooting with it today, I'd remind myself of this body of work by the late Robert Herman. A photographer since 1970, his work covers decades of life in New York and other countries around the world. I discovered this project he did using only the iPhone and the Hipstamatic app. Oh, the Hipstamatic app. Remember that? Is that still a thing, by the way, the Hipstamatic app? I'm not sure. I was looking through street photography films on YouTube and found this wonderful work. It just shows whatever camera you have, if you know how to use it and you can understand its limitations, you can produce some awesome results. Awesome? Did somebody say the word awesome? I think in this case it probably is. Unfortunately, Robert took his own life at the beginning of 2020 due to the isolation we all experienced as a result of the pandemic. Well, I looked this up actually. There are a few theories, aren't there, now as to why, but final note was very chilling, wasn't it? How can you enjoy life? It was very chilling indeed. But thank you, Elliot. Definitely, I can recommend his work. Go take a look. You will not be disappointed. The book that Elliot is talking about, the phone book, is available from Amazon. And there's another book called The New Yorkers, very rare book to find, says Elliot. I managed to get the phone book. You're quite right. I couldn't get the other one, but I bought my phone book. Quite a good price. It's a used book. Very happy with that. And I bought mine from Abe, ABE. Of course, you know me. I went down a huge rabbit hole of search and research following that. And Robert Herman is I could describe him as the inquisitive man's photography. He's a collector. He was a collector of scenery and people, and the very reason you should always have a camera with you. And that is what Robert was saying. I watched an interview on YouTube where he talked about having this phone with him and it becoming his muse. Did he call it his muse? But yes, go look up his work. A quote from the late great man. He said, "I chose to shoot the everyday people in situations near where I live in Little Italy, Soho, Tribeca and Greenwich Village. In a way, I was rebelling against the glamour and fashion of the time. I identify with their struggle just to survive, just as I was. My empathy and identification with the subjects translated into strong photos." Well, you're definitely right there. They certainly do. RobertHerman.com. I'll put a link on the web show page so you can go have a look for yourself. Right, time for part 2. Or I'm thinking of calling this chapters, yes. So I guess this will be chapter 2. Bear with me, that could be a sort of evolving part of the programme. And we'll have a chapter 3, our closing mail at the end of the show. And of course I want to hear from you with your stories and your pictures. What you've been out shooting, the adventures that you've been on, the trials and tribulations you might be having as a photographer as well. We can learn from you. There's no doubt about that. Send your emails to studio@photographydaily.show. And, of course, you will know that there are pictures on the show page, as always, that I'd like to share with you and our listeners that have sent them in would like to share with you. So, same thing, email address, studio@photographydaily.show. If you can remember, please, 2,000 pixels on the wide side for anything that you send in, and that goes for the pictures that you send in for the brand new 365 feature that starts up in September. This is a wonderful sight. I'm gonna stay and make a few more pictures because the sun is just coming out and hitting this lake, and then I'm gonna make my way towards Sandbanks. Let's just get myself a snap. It's lovely sort of high cirrus clouds there. Oh, Neil, you know your clouds. I do know my clouds. Not very good at trees. Can't tell a beech from an oak, but I know my clouds. A little bit of puffy cumulus there. Look at those. Are they no, Neil. Don't keep going on about the clouds. Just get another picture of this beautiful blanket of purple ahead of me. There we go. Wonderful. Yeah, coffee time. Have I got my... Yes, the flask is in the camera bag. The flask is in the camera bag. We're set. And while my Photowalk self is about to find that he might have the coffee but forgot the Garibaldis, no joke at all, let's meet this week's guest then, before returning to spend the last part of today's walk in amongst some of the, well, I think, most beautiful sand dunes you can find on the south coast. First, I'd like you to meet Edmond Terakopian, again, who is a definite friend of the show now, and I thought we'd spend a couple of weeks in his company in a two-parter with some surprises to come, by the way, this autumn, he says, teasing. Edmond is a photographer, no doubt. The Daily Mirror newspaper named him as the author of one of the world's most iconic photographs following the horrific 7/7 bombings in London. He was a member of a three-photographer team working directly for the British Prime Minister Tony Blair's office as the PM's official photographer at 10 Downing Street. And one day, I'd like to go with him on a Photowalk special edition around the capital, talking about those days. Edmond, that is, not Tony. For today, we'll return to talk about how a photojournalist sees the world differently. The connection we have to making pictures, switching off or not, as the case may be. And we'll touch on the events happening in Afghanistan and what that means for photographers trying to make pictures there. We've had many guests across the last year, but this is the first of our official Friday Photowalk guests. Before we talk about photojournalism, Edmond, how it's changed, how it's embracing more photographers and your own thoughts about the future, tell me about Unlocked, which I know you've been involved in. I know there's an exhibition planned, I think, still, hopefully, for September.
Yeah, absolutely. So Unlocked is a group exhibition of photographers who belong to the Ealing chapter or Ealing satellite of London Independent Photographers. Right. And it's a group of very passionate photographers, mainly enthusiasts. There's a couple of pros, but it's, the unifying thing is a passion for photography. And, we'd usually meet once a month. And of course, with the pandemic, our meetings took to Zoom. Yeah. And every year we have a big exhibition, which is part of Beat, which is a kind of an arts trail that Ealing organizes. And there's tens and tens of artists displaying their work over sort of a 2-week period. And that's kind of the big exhibition that we do. But of course, it got cancelled last year. And for this year, no one knew what the situation would be. And during our meetings, we realized that, it has to be an outdoor exhibition. It's just too risky to put all that time and effort and money into getting an exhibition ready, and then it gets cancelled off because lockdown rules are stricter or whatever. And we were sort of chatting away, and I just had this really crazy idea just came to mind of doing it on the outside of a big building. And I immediately thought of a hotel, the Holiday Inn in sort of Ealing Broadway. And then the police station's opposite it. And I thought, no, let's do it on the police station. Of course, I was looking at thumbnails of all my sort of friends' faces looking at me in a very kind of pitiful way of Edmond's completely lost it. This lockdown's obviously messed with his mind. Because, there's this sort of matrix of tiles beneath the windows. And it's a huge 5-story kind of office block kind of thing. It's perfect. It's a matrix. It's just there. It's ready for pictures to be put on it. And, the sort of conversation went one stage above jokiness and then went 2 stages above jokiness. And we kind of started working at it. I started writing to the police station, who found it very amusing to begin with, and then realized that it was serious, and then realized that actually that's a good idea. And then it was down to, fundraising and trying to get the funds together. The great thing about outdoor exhibitions is that many, many more people see them, regardless of pandemic or not, than indoor exhibitions, because you've got walkers by who will stop and sit and then get drawn into it. So we started the fundraising and started looking for avenues of ways to get this project, this crazy idea realized and actually, made into a proper exhibition. And we started looking around, and I'm absolutely thrilled to say we hit our target, and we had great support from Gogar Services, Fujifilm UK, and also Clarion Housing, which gave us a grant too. And a general crowdfunder as well. We had a lot of individuals who chipped in, who thought the idea was great. So Unlocked is going to be born. It's going to open on September the 11th, which is the date that the Beat exhibition starts. So, the whole of Ealing is transformed into an arty kind of arty venue for that weekend and the following weekend.
Who would ever have thought about putting an exhibition on the side of a police station? Oh, I know, Edmond Terakopian.
Yeah, some Armenian bloke who takes pictures.
You do realise
came up with it.
You do realise you've given yourself a bit of a job to better that next year. I've spoken to a good deal of photographers in the last year, and I'm going to try and unpick something that I think is unique about photojournalists. Stand by. I think a good photojournalist sees the world differently, not just the picture but the world, and it's something that I read on your blog recently that underlines comments made by other photojournalists that I've spoken to, such as Jason P. Howe. Your blog piece called "Pressing a Button is Not Photography." As photographers, we have a very deep connection to our work. It's a part of us. It's not a job. What is it for you? Because I know that if I cut you open, you would. That's a horrible expression, but you would bleed photography. You'd bleed photographic chemicals, probably.
Yeah, D76 running through my veins.
Only at the right temperatures, obviously.
Of course. Yeah, you could call it a calling, you could call it a vocation. It's kind of, partly these things, but let me mention one thing someone said to me recently, and it's something that, many people sort of say, in the choose the right job and you'll never work a day in your life, or, there's a phrase, along those lines. But it's kind of not that, because as photojournalists, we tend to never switch off. You're always looking, you're always wondering, you're always thinking. Everything massive from a huge world event happens to something small locally just down the street as you're walking to get some milk or something. These things are always making you think about the echoes and the layers and the levels and what effect this is going to have on something else and how the world balances, or, everything literally from a huge, big international thing to a smallest kind of local kind of issue. So whilst I absolutely love what I do and I wouldn't change it for anything at all, it is kind of hard work, but not in a kind of standing in a factory working kind of work, but you're mentally, you never really unwind. You don't really relax because you're always thinking, you're always looking, you're always exploring and so on. But for me, as I mentioned, it's something that's kind of deep within me, and it's something that I wouldn't want to change for anything. I feel very fortunate in being able to see things that necessarily other people won't see, or even other photographers won't see, but photojournalists might, because we have this kind of slightly deeper or unique way of looking at stuff.
Do you always carry a camera with you? I would imagine you do.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, at least one. And the phone doesn't count. The phone definitely doesn't count. And these days with camera technology, you can get extremely good compact cameras that have got big sensors that will shoot raw, and there's no reason not to carry a camera in a little bum bag or chest bag, or just on a shoulder off your just on a strap off your shoulder. Micro Four Thirds is very small. APS-C, you can get very small cameras. So anyone interested in image making really should never have an excuse of not having a camera to hand. I have to share this story with you. It kind of paints me in a slightly bad way, but it is quite funny. And years ago, we're going back at least 25 years ago now, I was with my closest friends. There's about 15 of us that have known each other since kind of pre-teenage years. So, very close-knit group of friends. It was New Year's Eve, and we were at one of the posh hotels in London, all dressed up with sort of, tuxedos and bow ties and so on, at this very nice dinner dance. And I was kind of slow dancing with a good friend of mine. And I started feeling really uneasy. I started feeling hot and sweaty and kind of weird sensation in my stomach. And she kind of caught sight of this and said, "Oh my God, you look terrible. Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I don't know. There's something, I feel really weird. I'm not sure what it is." I said, "Well, it's not, you haven't had that much to drink." I said, No, it's not that. A minute passed and I realized what it was. My camera was on the table, which was only about 7 meters away from where we were. But it was because it wasn't at hand that I felt uncomfortable. And it wasn't because I wanted to take a picture. It was just knowing that if I spotted a lovely image, not necessarily a news picture, but just the dance of light off something or whatever, or a nice juxtaposition, I couldn't shoot this picture. And when I realized, I said, I'm so sorry, can you just hang on 1 second? and left her on the dance floor, ran to the table, picked up my little Minolta, I think it was called an LC1. It was a little tiny film camera, and just ran back. And she kind of looked at me, and of course she knowing me, it kind of all made sense, and it was normal, And that was it. I was fine. It was so strange. It was like someone had flicked a switch, and I went from feeling really quite rough and weird to feeling absolutely 100%. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
It was just that. It was that's all it was. And it's because when I was learning photography as a hobby, I was sort of teaching myself, and I teach myself by reading as much as I could and going to as many galleries and seeing as many books and magazines and going to the library every 2 weeks and bringing out stacks of books. I read about this amazing press photographer called John Downing, who used to work for the Daily Express, and sadly, he passed away 2 years ago.
Not so long ago, was it? No.
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. Yeah. He was an absolute legend.
Yeah.
I mean, what a photographer. His work was just absolutely sublime on a totally different level to most other amazing photographers. And I don't know if you remember, the IRA bombed the Conservative Party annual conference when it was in Brighton.
Yeah. Who can forget
Thatcher
those
was
pictures?
Prime Minister.
Yeah,
exactly. And although all of Fleet Street had photographers there, everyone's cameras were in their rooms because everyone was downstairs in the bar, having a few drinks. The conference had been done for the day. But John Downing always carried a Canon Sure Shot with him, always. And he was the only photographer who got pictures that night. The hotel being evacuated. No one else had pictures.
So those images of Norman Tebbit being brought out on a stretcher, are they likely to be John's then, from that camera?
99.9% sure. Wow. Everything you've seen has been John's pictures.
Good heavens.
And, at the age of 16, when I read this, it really resonated with me, and it made me realize how important it is to always have a camera.
Yeah.
But as I say, it's not just in a news sense. And of course, news happens everywhere. You could walk down the street, as I said, to get a pint of milk or something, and something horrible happens. Or something great happens, but newsworthy. But it's not just that. It just might be that the light's amazing, or you see a phenomenal rainbow, or there's a reflection of something, and it's like, oh, wow, that's a great picture. And, you shoot it.
The last time we spoke, we were in the midst of a longer conversation about how little access photojournalists had during the pandemic and the hospital wards. And we're not out of the woods yet, of course, with COVID. The landscape is entirely different in terms of available vaccine, advances in treatment from our last conversation. Is this still a photographic story in the wards now? Has that landscape changed for you?
The answer is yes, it definitely is a story in the wards. That we still have people who are getting sick, but the access just still isn't there. Right. There is still this massive censorship. And if you look at the way society is reacting to it, it kind of clearly shows what an important role the press has to play. But when it's been censored at a governmental level, society loses out. This is the thing. We're the eyes and ears of our readers.
Yeah.
And when we're not allowed to do that, they don't have the information. When you look at the anti-vaxxers and the COVID hoax people, they just don't have the information. Otherwise, how could someone want to be that way? We occasionally hear of stories of people who died, especially from America. This comes out a lot more. I can't think of anything that I've read about such things here in the UK, but you hear about these massive anti-vaccine, anti-COVID, anti-this, anti-that, people, dying in the ward, and the last words they say is, I wish I'd taken the vaccine.
Yeah.
And, it's ridiculous. If we could cover what's going on properly, then people would see what's happening. When we had, mass vaccinations for polio and other diseases that have practically been eradicated, hence survival and population booms. it was because people were much better informed. You know, they would get the paper, they would read analysis, they would think deeply. Whereas nowadays, the negative of social media is that everyone has an equal voice. You know, you could go onto Twitter and read everything from someone telling you the earth is flat to someone telling you that it's not flat, and they both have equal placing. And this is the problem. You know, we've got people pushing an anti-vax platform, sometimes out of naivety or not thoughtfulness, but sometimes actually out of malice, you know, because when you have a momentum of people who will believe anything, you can get them to do anything you want. And, you know, there's usually a sinister kind of puppet master at the end of this. Yeah. And the weird thing is, of course, people are finding blogs to uphold their own prejudice by using their smartphone, which is tracking everywhere they go anyway. I mean, the whole thing's really ridiculous. It's kind of, you know, I'm sure decades from now, people will look back at this time frame of Brexit and Trump and anti-vaxxers when, you know, millions are sick and hundreds of thousands are dying constantly, and laugh at us, thinking, oh my God, this was the human race in, you know, 2020, 2021. It's what was happening.
Well, let's stick with the pandemic for a moment. Being international, I'm wondering how, as a photojournalist navigating these times, your habits, the way you work, the work that's available, how that's changed for you, unlikely many professional photographers worldwide.
The landscape's definitely changed. Things are opening up, of course, a lot more now, and assignments are coming in a lot more now. Yeah. At the moment, I'm doing more sort of corporate and commercial kind of work that falls into my way of working as a photojournalist, you know, telling stories, shooting more reportage kind of stuff. Yeah. But, you know, newspaper work has changed a lot. You know, budgets have changed. And as far as the pandemic goes, it's still not easy to immediately go on a story because you have to wait until you get a test. You need to get test results before which you can't get onto a plane. Yeah. And most places where you go to, most countries you travel to, you still need to quarantine or at least have a test kind of within 72 hours. You know, different countries have different rulings on this, which might seem just a bit of a hassle for a holidaymaker, but when you're going to photograph a story, minutes can make a difference. Yeah. You know, if you think of the absolutely heartbreaking smartphone footage we saw of people, Afghanis, clinging on to US military aircraft taking off because they were so desperate to leave a country because they knew they would get strung up by the Taliban. So this thing of a news story just having broken, you're trying to get there, making travel plans to get there as soon as possible are crucial. And of course, the pandemic and rightly so, with its various kind of checks in place and tests needing to be done and quarantine and all of that, of course, are going to play a massive role in delaying all of that.
I want to stick with social media, and you've mentioned Afghanistan, so this seems like a good moment to mention. An interesting debate of late with regard how social media is changing, and in particular Instagram, the fact that it's now not solely a platform for stills, but becoming more things to more creatives. It's been and is now, with the news coming out of Afghanistan, as you say, a very precious way to get pictures out there pretty quickly from a cross-section of photographers and journalists and those simply on the ground. I wonder how important this platform is to you or to photography, and how you see. I know we've sort of got this double-edged sword relationship with social media, because on the one hand we use it as photographers, and on the other hand it makes life a little bit harder, doesn't it?
Yeah, and in various ways. I mean, there's so many layers to this. I mean, you mentioned Instagram, but it's social media full stop. Twitter's obviously an extremely powerful platform as well. The problem is, again, it comes down to people who insist the earth is flat. It's that mentality. You can't believe everything you see or you read on social media. It might be, obviously we're sticking to photography. It might be that photograph is Photoshop, but even if it's a real picture, you don't know which country it was shot in, and you don't know which decade it was shot in. Yes. Unless obviously, it's a plate camera from the beginning of the century, last century. So these are problems. So it's all about following the Instagram accounts and the Twitter accounts of real photojournalists accredited, known photojournalists who've devoted decades of their lives to telling stories properly. And also looking up accounts of news publications, news organizations, wire agencies, news agencies who've beyond doubt proven that they are the purveyors of truth, because they have decades after decades of experience. And, as long as one is looking at these accounts, then you know that what's been put on there has been vetted, has been double-checked, has been triple-checked. Because even with the story from Afghanistan for now, for example, it's very fresh. When a piece of footage or a photograph comes out, AP, for example, let's just use Associated Press as an example, won't just pick up that contributed work and just throw it on the AP newswire, because they have a reputation to uphold. They're not some blog who, is peddling nonsense. They're a big international news organization of standards. So before anything gets put out on there, it's verified and it's checked and it's double checked and it's compared to other things that might be available already. If there's GPS and there's a timestamp, that's all checked. We have people who can do forensic checking to make sure a file hasn't been tampered with or rewritten, the EXIF hasn't been rewritten, and so on. So these things are very, very important. And of course, time and time again, we've seen what happens when people follow footage from, in inverted commas, citizen journalists who pretend they've got a photograph of so-and-so or a video of so-and-so, where it turns out days later that it's absolutely wrong. You think of the Boston Marathon bombing, and this guy was peddling these pictures saying he's got photographs of the bombers, and the police were chasing the wrong people for days until they eventually realized that they're being, led up the garden path. And, we're fools if we want to fool ourselves by finding stuff that supports our own mistakes and our own weird prejudices.
You, of course, have your own experiences, both personal and professional, in the Middle East. Access is going to be even more important in the days and weeks. I mean, in fact, you could almost say minutes and days and weeks. That's how quickly this news story is changing, in Afghanistan in particular. But it's going to be dangerous, isn't it, to be the person making and sending pictures out from Afghanistan, I would have thought. There's a handful of very good photojournalists whose pictures I've been looking at very carefully over the last few days, but how long can they stay there?
Very good question. And it's not just Afghanistan, any war zone, any riot, let's even go less, any riot can turn deadly. Yeah. You could be in Westminster photographing an anti-hunt riot and it turns dangerous. And of course, with war zones or conflict zones or civil unrest places, there's always been the danger of collateral damage, collateral deaths, which is a horrible way of saying it, but accidents happen when things are going wrong. But, ever since probably the war in the former Yugoslavia, journalists started to get pinpointed for attack. And ever since that conflict, every conflict you look at, pretty much every major conflict you look at since, specifically photojournalists, because they have to be at the front line to get the pictures, have been targeted and killed. There's a big list of names of very dedicated, very important journalists who have been killed that way. And of course, Afghanistan is the last place. How this will play out for access for journalists, photojournalists, is actually very difficult to even guess. And I base this purely on watching CNN footage yesterday of, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the female journalist, but she was of course, hijabbed up and covering herself in the correct way to be able to work in a fundamentalist Islamic country. But she had access everywhere she went, and they were doing interviews with and in front of groups and groups of armed Taliban. She was interviewing them, and the only bit I say only not to downplay it, but through a day of reporting, the only time she had problems was outside the American embassy, where she was shooed away, not because she was a journalist, because she was a woman. Now, I was surprised at the Taliban's openness to letting her work throughout the rest of the day, for two reasons. One, American journalist, and two, female American journalists. So that actually bode well. That was a big relative positive in what we would have imagined. Taliban overrunning Kabul in a matter of hours. You wouldn't imagine that journalists would be able to even duck out from under the couch, but people were allowed to work. Now, how that changes will depend on the Taliban leadership when it goes in.
Undoubtedly a story we'll all be carefully following, and Edmond returns next week. Incidentally, there's a photographer who I'll link to called Jim Hurlbrook, who, as I type these words, remembering things can change in a whisker, is making the most extraordinary photo stories on the ground in Afghanistan. In his Instagram feed, you'll see up-to-date imagery, including a picture called Cause and Effect, which features two members of the Taliban sat astride a motorcycle watching the traffic in Kabul. Ahead of them, signs of Western culture on an advertising hoarding, but also a painted mural of which the contents and juxtaposition couldn't be more striking. I'll let you find that image, and I'll link to Jim's feed. But it is to be noted that the coverage changes pretty quickly from one form of lockdown to arguably a different form. Edmond returns next week. There's a few lighter subjects to discuss, including how his new surprising hobby has taken over his life, although it's still broadly connected to photography in a macro term. And let's return to close this week's Photo Walk. And my Photo Walk self has at last returned to the beach. A couple of weeks ago I was praising, wasn't I, Singe for his beautiful pictures of the part of the world that I'm stood in at the moment, which is the sand dunes within what's called sand banks, which is part of the Studland Peninsula, this bit? Yes, it must be. To my left I've got the small chain link ferry, which I know I've got about an hour's queue to make, so I thought, well, why not sit down and finish the podcast here? There's a tiny bit of water it needs to cross, but there really is. There's just the one ferry. It's very old. I think it's probably the same ferry that we used to go on. 40 years ago. And then right ahead of me, I've got just this beautiful beach scene. Let me get a picture. So I'll try and get the ferry. Let's get the ferry one. I don't have a wide angle on it. It's my 35mm, well, essentially 35mm. In old money, in full frame language. 23, of course, on Fujifilm. There's the ferry, chain link ferry, just the other side of this tree. 1000th, f5, 160 ISO. And then ahead of me, just a scene of serenity. People on the beach, just having a good time. I'm going to sit within the dunes here, and we'll have a little chinwag, shall we? Hold on, where shall I go? I can hear the ferry. I don't know, you probably can't hear that, but in the background you hear the sort of groaning of the chains in the ferry. Well, that's it. My thanks to Edmond Terakopian this week for being our first guest on this amalgamated show of the chat show that came from Wednesday, and of course the photo walk on a Friday. It feels like the start of term. I mean, for our kids, they're not so far away from the start of term. Our little one Thomas is already saying, "Oh, is it school soon?" Because it's his new big school. All change. Always seems all change this time of year, doesn't it? 365s are to come as well in September. I've mentioned them a couple of times now within the show, and I really need your help for this feature. It's my way of making sure that Photography Daily means exactly that, really, that we think about stuff every day. They don't have to be pictures that you've made over the last 5 days, 7 days, 7 months, 7 years. They can be pictures that you're proud of, that tell a story. That's really what I'd like to receive. So send them to the email address studio@photographydaily.show. We've got a few coming in already, which is nice. I'm going to put some of my own up as well, but I'd love to get yours. One frame. But if you do send many in, they'll be featured at some stage. And as per our tradition on the show, it is time for Last Mail of the Week. One from Martin Ellard. I still haven't got a sung jingle for that, Martin. I don't intend to, not on this show. You just have to hear my shower singing voice. Hi, Neil. I was listening to the recent Instagram episode on my drive to a shoot yesterday, and what you said about pretty much shutting off during lockdown really struck a chord with me. I shot one full proper Wedding. So you're a wedding photographer too, are you? Last year, in what was supposed to be the busiest year so far, it was a week before lockdown, and I thought it would keep me stocked up on social content. Yep, I said it, and I hate it too. For a while, but a few weeks into the pandemic, and it was obvious couples were panicking about their weddings more and more, and I felt posting happy, lively wedding images just reminded people what they couldn't have. You see, now Martin, that's exactly what I was thinking, and I haven't started up my photography Instagram account at all. It's just something I've gotten out of the habit of doing, but it was precisely for that reason that I stopped doing it in March 2020. I just thought it didn't seem right, well, for me anyway, and I've not got into the habit ever since. Isn't it wonderful when you sit by a beach to hear kids just shouting and whooping? That one's just lost his rubber ring into the sea, which reminds me, I should let me tell you my mum and the rubber ring story before we close off today. But anyway, back to Martin. 60 million months on, I still find it hard to get my Insta mojo back. I've posted the odd shot here and there and had a very average 60 to 70 likes, but very little engagement. It was mentioned about our wedding Instas as being another portfolio, and that's what it's become, really. I very rarely get inquiries via Insta, and very rarely look in on the account anymore. Compared to my second account of this, brings me to the comments about being personal. At the beginning of lockdown, I started a new Insta about the big DIY projects that I started. There really wasn't anything else to do. You're absolutely right, Martin. I did so much DIY during lockdown. Really, if there wasn't a scrap of wood left, because you couldn't go out and get more wood from the wood merchants, could you? So every bit of wood that was available, I made a train. A wooden train for our Thomas. Kel Surprise, if you've listened to the show, he loves his trains. And things to hold pots, and it was DIY central, wasn't it? I decided while many photographers were packing up their gear, I needed something to keep my eye on the ball. So the DIY account. I shoot a lot of commercial work, and over recent years, client social media marketing content has become more and more popular. So I thought I may as well use this time to keep my hand in at our.crafty.home. It became a place I could post pictures of our DIY adventures and my growing lockdown obsession with plants. So I will include that link so that you can go and see it. The DIY renovation plant community on Insta, Neil, is amazing. And I've had more interaction and engagement and made more online friends in 1 year than my photo account since Insta began. I started crossing over to my photo account, reposting plant and house pictures to my stories, and found people coming over to the new account. And in recent weeks, with weddings starting again, it's amazing when I turn up for prep and somebody will say, "Oh, I like your living room," or "I'm really jealous of your office jungle." I'm realizing that I need to up my game and start mixing these two accounts a bit more as a bit of an experiment. And that's what we talked about on that show, wasn't it? Using your Insta account to show your life. I'm not suggesting that it needs to become something akin to the influencers, but maybe a bit of both is a good thing now. Your clients, whatever genre you shoot, be it social or editorial, start to see that you're a real person and you don't just post pictures that you want people to like. So I'm with you on this one, really, Martin, and I guess. Really, I keep meaning to get back on board with my Insta account, and that's what I will do with it. I hear a lot of people, says Martin, online saying, show what you want to shoot, which I do, and be yourself and show your personality. But these are becoming standard throwaway comments that don't really describe what's actually needed. Back in the good old press days, a PR person would ring up and say, while you're at it, get me something a bit broadsheet. Which would mean try and be creative, but we have no idea how or what we want. It's all on you, because it's a ribbon cutting after all. I loved Insta when it began, and in recent years fell into the likes trap and spending far too much time worrying about the algorithm. I hope to try and embrace the new changes, and stepping back and not worrying about it so much has shown me it's okay not to post every day or even every week. Anyway, I'm off to Worcester later for a proper wedding, and I'm looking forward to the Friday photo walk to keep me company. Thanks for your wanderings, your ramblings and your thoughts, and stopping to listen to birds. From Martin Ellard. Well, not many birds today. I was really hoping to grab the sounds of wood pigeons in the path that my mum and dad used to walk me down to the beach at Studland. That was my earliest memory of, I love that sound. Wood pigeons. Wood pigeons meant we're going down the path to the seaside with Mum and Dad. But I must have walked down that path, up and down, I don't know, half a dozen times. There, back, there, back, there, back. And I didn't get one single wood pigeon. I was waiting just to switch on the microphone and say, listen to that, wood pigeon. But here I am, at the end of the day, Studland Beach. Children loosely in the background playing. Ferries. Tree behind me. The wind's getting up quite a lot, actually. I know I need to hit the road, but let me just tell you the story about my mum on Studland Bay, just along the way. My mum was one for, I think I may have told this story a long time ago. She was one for falling asleep on lilos. And you put a lilo in the sea, in a bay, with the tide going out, and that's a recipe for disaster. I should not be laughing. This story does end on a good note, but I always remember my father watching, looking at the sea, watching my mother float further and further out, saying, Wendy! 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 She couldn't hear at all until, I don't know whether she did hear, or maybe the sound of the beach fading in the background, that she was entirely on her own going out into the bay. Maybe the sound of silence woke her up, as they say. Because the next thing, I can't remember, did she fall off? I think I may have told this story with her falling off the lilo. You know, sometimes when you embellish stories so much, you can't quite remember what really did happen. But, they didn't have an argument when she eventually came in. What, John? What? I was fine, you weren't. I was just about to call the lifeboat. Oh, dear. Happy memories. Right. Let's go and, let me go and sit with Car in a long traffic jam to get on this chain link ferry home. Although I could stay here all evening. Oh, here we go. Through the dunes. Well, that's it for this week's new style of Photowalk, and I'm looking forward to taking many more with you. So remember, you drive this show with your thoughts and your feelings about photography and your comments about previous guests and what they've had to say. So keep reaching out, as they say, to studio@photographydaily.show. studio@photographydaily.show. And if you're a first-time writer, you're especially welcome. And remember to send, if you can, some pictures that show us your work too for the show page. Remember, 2,000 pixels wide on the long side. My thanks to Edmond Terakopian for joining us today as we walk. Next week, in his second part, we're going to, try to unpick street photography.
To me, street photography is daily life photographed journalistically, i.e. not tampered with, not posed up, not set up. It's things that happen for real through day-to-day living, and it's finding interesting moments within what is usually actually mundane things.
And we'll find out more about this passion he has as a photographer, something many of us share.
I never want photography to become a job for me, as in a 9-to-5 job. I've seen colleagues who are 9-to-5 photographers. If it's, 10 minutes past 5 o'clock when they've put their cameras in their bag and Big Ben topples out of St. Elizabeth's Tower and bounces across the river, they wouldn't take a picture of it.
Tomorrow for our patrons, the More Show talks about taking risks. Who cares if you're 500 feet underground at a deep mine shaft with only one roll of Delta 3200? And I speak with Paul Cameron, albeit briefly, about his film directing career. If you haven't yet, join our private Facebook group and follow us on Instagram. Links to all this and our guests and our wonderful supporters on Patreon will be on the Photography Daily show page today, linked to in your podcast player app as always. Music on the show from the incredible artlist.io. And I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you next time. Well, here we go, Car. The famous Studland chain link ferry. What do you think of this?
Well, frankly, I'm amazed it floats.
Well, we've avoided a 25-mile drive by taking this ferry. Greta would be very proud of us,
Apart from the fact it's blowing out diesel.
Really miserable. Do you know there's been a ferry here crossing the short bit of water since 1923? And until nearly 1960, the ferries were all steam-powered,
Fascinating. Can I correct you on something, by the way? You said, look at all these amazing shrubs. when actually, technically, it's heathland.
Ugh, I knew I got that wrong. Do you think anybody noticed, Car?
Probably.
Oh, best not mention it again then. Let's get home. But don't start driving yet. You don't want to end up in the drink.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.